Avengers Infinity War is out next week, and I'm so excited. I can't think of another film that's had me this excited before, ever. There's been films here and there that I've been like, oh, I can't wait to see this one, but this is a whole new level. This is a culmination of 18 movies before it, all coming to a head. I want to see it now, but I can't. So instead, I'm going to rank the old MCU movies, because why not? I like ranking. Some may say I'm a ranker. Let's rank now. Coming in at last place then, Thor the Dark World. It's perhaps not surprising that Thor the Dark World's at the bottom of my list because it seems to be at the bottom of most people's lists, certainly the ones I've seen. There's just not a lot to take away from this film that's enjoyable. It's got a messy plot. It spends a lot of time on Asgard but doesn't do anything interesting with it. Natalie Portman seems like she doesn't want to be there, and seeing as she didn't turn up for the next one, perhaps that was the case. The whole relationship and romance angle between her and Thor it didn't feel great in the first Thor movie. It feels worse in this one. And then there's the villain, Christopher Eccleston, who hasn't helped matters by saying how much he hated making this film, and it shows. Malekith isn't a great... Is it Malekith? I think that's how you say his name. I can't remember. He's not a great villain. He's, in fact, the worst villain that the MCU's had. And the MCU has had some villain problems over its time. I've watched this film 3 times now, and each time I go into it, I'm like, right, maybe I was missing something last time. Maybe this time I'll like it. I'm watching them all in order for the first time, which I've just done. Perhaps Thor the Dark World will hold up a little bit better. It doesn't. If anything, it's worse. Of all the MCU films, this is perhaps the only one that I'd say to skip. Just have a read up on what happens with Thor and Loki, because that's really the best part of the film. Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston are brilliant. Like, they work together really well. I enjoy seeing Loki in this one. But that's about it. That's the only thing I could take away from this that I enjoyed. At number 17, Iron Man 2. It's a little surprising when you think back to the early MCU. There was a couple of missteps. One we'll get to in a minute. But there was 2 films after a successful and very good first one that didn't really live up to the expectations. This has happened quite recently with the DCEU, and which isn't... Sorry, it's not called the DCEU, is it? It never was. And everyone's been very quick to jump on DC about how bad their film franchise is going, but the MCU didn't really start off all that differently. Iron Man 2 has some great ideas, and it has a great performance by Robert Downey Jr. I enjoy seeing Tony Stark going off the rails a little bit like he does here, struggling to get used to this new level of infamy that he has. And there's some brilliant sequences. The racetrack sequence is fantastic. Like, I could watch that sequence again and again. It's really good. But I'm struggling to think of anything else. Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow doesn't seem like the sort of character that she would go on to become. Like, she's not that memorable in this one. But really, my biggest problem is that Iron Man 2 doesn't feel like it matters. This was early days of the MCU, so they were still putting things together, but whereas all the other films feel like they belong, well, most of them, this one doesn't. It feels overly complicated. It feels like there's too much going on. And its ending feels a little bit too much like a rehash of the ending for Iron Man 1. With another 2 men clad in metal just fighting until one of them gets knocked out. We've seen this before, and this shouldn't be repeating itself this early on. At number 16 then, The Incredible Hulk. I feel a little bad for The Incredible Hulk movie because it's not a bad movie at all. If anything, I quite like it. I think it's good. It's just where it sits in the MCU is just... it feels strange to me. Numerous people have said that The Incredible Hulk is canon. Like, it is part of it. It definitely still is. But Edward Norton has a very different feel to him than Mark Ruffalo does. I like both performances, but they're very, very different. And tonally, it feels quite different as well. The MCU has got great over the years at having different tones for its films, but having them still feel like they're part of this same franchise. The Incredible Hulk didn't really get that. And it's also one of the ones I get the least enjoyment on rewatching. As much as I love Mark Ruffalo, it would have been interesting to see what Ed Norton would have done carrying on with the role, and how The Incredible Hulk would have held up if the lead actor had continued on with it. So yeah, not a bad film, just an odd one. Just one that doesn't feel like it belongs as much as the others do. At number 15, Captain America, The First Avenger. Honestly, I don't know how unpopular opinion this is, but I find Captain America, The First Avenger to be quite boring. it starts well enough. Like, I enjoy skinny Steve Rogers. I enjoy seeing him as he was before he became Captain America. And where he gets his powers, like that moment, is great. But after that, things fall apart. There's a lot of montages in this film. There's many a montage. Too many montages, one would say. And to repeat myself again on the villain problem, Red Skull, no. No, he's not a great villain. It's a shame because Hugo Weaving's awesome. Just not so much in this. I don't feel it's his fault. I think it's a script problem. But I struggled to find anything to connect with when it comes to Red Skull. And that's problematic because Red Skull is a huge villain from the comics, like a massive villain. He's Captain America's main villain, I believe. Not 100% on comics, but from what I understand, he is. There should have been more done with him here. Much like the others below it, when it comes to rewatching MCU films, this is another one where I'm just a bit... Okay, let's get this one over with a little bit, rather than something that I'm excited to watch. As I say, it's got some fantastic moments, but on the whole, First Avenger just doesn't do anything for me. Number 14, another early one, it's Thor. I enjoy Thor more than I did the first time I saw it. Like, I'm seeing new things that I hadn't seen for the first time, I'm connecting with it more, but it's still got issues. It still feels very slow, like a very slow film. And as much as I love the character of Thor, as much as I love Chris Hemsworth, there isn't really that many other players in this film who are memorable at all. Like, the Warriors 3, they're fine. Like, Sif is probably the one out of all of them that I like the most, only because I've seen her in more things. She was great in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But the others, sometimes I struggle to remember their names. And the human characters as well are... Natalie Portman's Jane is probably the best of the bunch, but that's only because she's given the most to do. Like, the others are forgettable, and to have them pop up again in Avengers, I think they show up again as well. And in Thor the Dark World, like, I've seen all I need to see of these people. I don't need to spend any more time with them, and thankfully Thor Ragnarok realised that too. That being said, despite it just being another giant metal villain at the end, I enjoy that it seems to be a little bit more of a smaller scale fight for Thor. And I like having Coulson around helping out as well. There are bits of this that I enjoy. Tom Hiddleston, again, great as Loki, he always is. But yeah, on the whole, it's just not one that I can place any higher. Number 13, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This one hurts. This one, I mean, 13th, it's not awful. Like, it's not the worst MCU movie, but it sucks to have to put this one so low. When I first watched it, I enjoyed it a lot, and there are still things that I enjoy. I think the comedy in this is brilliant. There's some really funny moments, and some of those moments are funnier than in the first one. But the problem for me is that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 doesn't really have that interesting a story. It has great fun little moments here and there, but the story itself is really weak. The character of Ego, and whenever he's on screen, the movie just feels like it grinds to a halt. And that's a massive problem when it is the movie's main story that's making that happen. It's just dull, it's unengaging, and rewatching Guardians of the Galaxy 2 for just the second time was a struggle. At moments it was a chore. That is a real shame, because I was so excited for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I love the first one, that's much higher on this list. But this one just, it dropped the ball in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy a lot of it. I think the characters, the main characters, the Guardians, are brilliant. I love that there's a lot more Nebula in this one. Mantis is fantastic as well. And Yondu's character arc is just brilliant. Like, I can watch that. Like, if I could, I may even do it. I may just upload this film to my Mac and just cut out all of the Ego stuff and just have the bits that I like, and then I'd love it. But yeah, Ego, it's just a poor choice in my opinion. I really hope Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is top tier. Number 12, Avengers: Age of Ultron. This was one. Avengers: Age of Ultron taught me a lesson. When I went and saw this, it was at a press screening. It was when I was writing reviews, and Joss Whedon came out to introduce the film. And I have always loved Joss Whedon. Like, his work has inspired me so much. Buffy, Angel, Firefly, even Dollhouse. Like, I think he's a fantastic writer, and he's one of my idols. So to be in a cinema and then to have Joss Whedon himself come out and introduce his film, I think it coloured my view on that film quite a lot. I came out of it loving it. I think I gave it 4.5 out of 5. I was scoring out of 5 then. And yeah, I was telling everybody what a fantastic film it was. I loved it. Some people weren't liking it, and I couldn't understand how. Then I got it on Blu-ray and watched it again, and yeah, it's got issues. I still think it's a good film. I stand by that. There's a lot in this I like, and particularly James Spader as Ultron. Like, he's the perfect voice for this character. He gives Ultron much more depth than he could have done with any other actor. Like, James Spader's voice, great voice. Love his voice. It's perfectly used here. And it's fascinating seeing the Avengers start to pull apart a little bit. This is Tony Stark's fault that this has happened, and characters in the movie don't let him forget it. It also balances the humour and the drama, I think, pretty well for the most part too. Like, I was consistently entertained, but it goes on a bit. The whole subplot with Thor with the guy from the first Thor, I forget his name, the old professor guy who just gets used in weird ways. That whole sequence of him in that pool is just, not only does it not make sense now with the direction that they changed in Thor Ragnarok, but it's so boring. Like, it stops the movie's momentum when it goes back to this. And I think it was the studio themselves that made Joss Whedon put this in there. It was a bad call. It's a bad call. It shouldn't have been there at all. And this may just be me, but I feel it gets a bit too grandiose at the end, with the flying city that could drop down and destroy everything and everyone. Like, it gets a bit too big, I think, for its own good. And also, we have a big sacrifice from a character here who's only just showed up in this film. It's like, that didn't really have any emotional effect on me at all, because we'd only just met this guy. So yeah, Avengers Age of Ultron. Still think it's a good film. Certainly not as good as I thought when I first saw it. I'd say this was a good place to put it. Number 11, Iron Man. The one that started it all. I've got to say, watching Iron Man for the first time, I had no idea that it would become what it has now. And the great thing about this film is that it stands up very well as just a standalone movie. But it stands up better as the film that kick-started everything that came after it. From the moment he appears on screen, Robert Downey Jr. makes his case extremely well as to why he was the perfect choice to play Tony Stark. Back in 2008, he wasn't a huge star anymore. He dropped off the map a little bit. Iron Man brought him straight back into A-list territory, and he deserves everything that he gets from this because he's fantastic. And what I like the most about this film, I think, is that it's a very personal story for a large part of its running time. It's Tony Stark held captive, having to use his brains, of which he has a giant brain by the look of it, to get himself out of a horrible and very tricky, potentially deadly situation. And it's here where the film is at its best. Just Tony Stark just having to do whatever it takes to survive. It makes him a likeable character. It makes him somebody that you want to root for, because Tony Stark is a very arrogant man quite a lot of the time, but from his very first appearance in the movies we see a very vulnerable side to him. For me though, Iron Man, as much as I enjoy the film as a whole, and I do, it suffers in its third act. Like, as villains go, I think the concept of the one we got here was good. It's just the execution, not so much. Like, I get the need for spectacle. I understand why they gave him his own Iron Man-like suit and had them fight. But it was just very unsatisfying. It just took away a lot of the personality involved in this conflict. It was just two people, giant metal suits, going at each other. And yeah, it lost me a little bit in that. And on repeat viewing as well, it doesn't hold up quite as well. Still, Iron Man is a great film, and it's the one that we can thank for giving us the rest of the MCU. It's not quite a top 10 film, but it's still very, very good. Number 10, Doctor Strange. Of all the movies in the MCU so far, Doctor Strange was the one that I was looking forward to the least. I think the trailers didn't do a lot for me. And yeah, it was the first time that I was just like, oh, it's another MCU film. Yeah, I'll go watch it. No, I'm not excited. And I was worried as well. I thought that this could be the MCU's first flop. Like, I just didn't see Doctor Strange doing all that well, or being that good a film. I was wrong, and thankfully I was wrong as well, because Doctor Strange I enjoyed a lot more than 8 other movies apparently. Another thing that I got wrong was Benedict Cumberbatch. I like him as an actor. I think he's a very good actor, but I didn't see him as Doctor Strange. Like, he to me just didn't seem like somebody who would be the right fit for the MCU in the direction that it was going. I'm happy to be proved wrong on this one though, because he is so good. Like, from the start to the end of this movie, every time he's on screen, he has completely got my attention. And it's also a far funnier film than I thought it would be as well. Wong is a fantastic... I'm so glad Wong's coming back in Infinity War. I can't wait to see more Wong. He should have his own movie. Give Wong a film. And what's brilliant too is that it doesn't hold back on the weirdness. Doctor Strange is a very, very strange film. Like, it is. It uses interesting visuals. It introduces the mystical side to the MCU, and it does it, I think, brilliantly. Like, visually, this film is absolutely stunning. I'm annoyed it's not out on 4K. I want to see this on 4K because it's such a colourful film. It's perfect for HDR. But yeah, just in terms of pure spectacle, like, this film blew me away. Like, the opening sequences, the sort of Inception-like with the buildings folding in themselves, just stunning to look at. Like, it's not a perfect film. I mean, if it was, it would probably be number one on this list. Although number one, I don't think it's perfect either. For example, it seemed a bit too easy for Stephen Strange to become Doctor Strange, to embrace these powers. Like, it was, yeah, for something so huge, it felt like he got there pretty simply. And there's also a large part of the fact it doesn't seem like he deserved it. But with most of these films in the top 10 now, like, the flaws are much harder to identify, I think, than a lot of the other ones. And I'm doing this list purely based on how much the movie entertained me and how much I liked it. Yeah, Doctor Strange, 10th place. Number 9, Thor Ragnarok. My review for Thor Ragnarok is actually on the channel. You can find it if you just look in other videos that I've uploaded here. I stole it from the old channel that I used to work on. And yeah, re-uploaded it to this one. So you can see my thoughts on Thor Ragnarok in depth if you want to. Have a look at that. And those thoughts haven't really changed in the months that have gone past. I own it now, so I've watched it again. And 4K, by the way, wow. Like, Thor Ragnarok is incredible looking in HDR. Do watch it that way if you can. But yeah, my thoughts on it then are my thoughts on it now. It's a very funny film. It's perhaps the funniest MCU. I laughed a lot. Rewatching it as well, I continue to laugh at all the bits that made me laugh before. Taika Waititi just did amazing things with his script, and he did amazing things for the character of Thor as well. Both the other Thor movies didn't break the top 10. Like, Thor: The Dark World is the worst, as far as I'm concerned. So to come back and have Thor become this character that I want to see again, somebody that I loved watching, like, it needed a change in tone, and yeah, Taika Waititi did that wonderfully. That being said, though, my issues with the film remain. I still think it relies on humour in inappropriate moments. Spoilers, I should have said at the start of this, I'll put a thing in the description that the spoilers for all of these films. But, for example, Asgard being destroyed, it's used as a punchline. That's the biggest, I think, moment in the MCU so far. And the gravity of it is lost because it keeps falling back to jokes all the time. It annoys me then, it still annoys me now. But the comedy and just the general fun of this film is so good that it definitely earns its ninth spot, despite the fact I've got so many issues with it as well. I think this is a film that I can just watch again and again and continue to find it funny, and all the performances are great as well. Chris Hemsworth in particular just seems to relish the opportunity to play Thor a lot lighter than he had done before. Tom Hiddleston gets to do similar things with Loki, and he seems to be enjoying himself. I love the Hulk in this. I wish there was more opportunity to explore the effects on Bruce Banner for spending 2 years as the Hulk, but again, this film isn't concerned about serious dramatic moments, it's concerned about getting to the next joke. And viewed like that, yeah, it succeeds. It may be a little bit odd for me to put Thor Ragnarok above Doctor Strange when I can identify a lot more of the flaws with it than I can with that one, but hey, it's my list. This is where I put it. Number 8, Ant-Man. Ant-Man was one of the biggest surprises, I think, in the MCU. I didn't know really what to make of it going in. Like, the trailer made me laugh. I enjoyed the Thomas the Tank Engine bit, which is still my favourite bit of the film. But I didn't really know what to expect. I absolutely loved almost every second of it. Yeah, the villain's shit. Like, it's not a great villain. He's very, very, very bland. But everything else around that just works so well. Michael Cena is as good as Paul Rudd is, and he's very good as Scott Lang. Michael Cena steals this. Just the choice to have him breaking down his plans in the way that he does, it just, every single time I see it, it makes me laugh. This is a film that is having fun. It's having so much fun with what it's doing, and it's using its premise, being able to shrink things down or make them large, as it turns out they can do later on. It uses that to such great effect. I actually think the character of Scott Lang is exactly what the MCU needed at this point. He's a very different sort of hero. He's been a criminal, and he still is to a degree, but it doesn't make him any less likable. He's got this snark about him and just this general sense of fun and wonder. And yeah, he fits in extremely well with the MCU. He was brilliant in Civil War as well. And I can't wait for Ant-Man and the Wasp. Number 7, Iron Man 3. This is probably the one that's going to annoy people the most. I think, the people that tend to get annoyed for no reason just because somebody's got a different opinion. Whenever I see somebody say how much they love Iron Man 3, it normally has people that can sense that somebody likes Iron Man 3 and they'll descend on them and they'll attack. I don't see what's wrong with Iron Man 3. I can understand from the point that if you were incredibly excited for the Mandarin, like if you were super excited to see the Mandarin be the villain for Iron Man 3, to be the main villain, because it does snatch that away, but I had no real investment. I hadn't read the Iron Man comics. I'd had no real interaction with the Mandarin at all. I knew very little about him. I thought he looked cool in the trailer. I thought Ben Kingsley looked menacing. But I didn't have that attachment to him. So when the big twist came and it turned out that he was an actor the whole time and a very sort of drunk British football supporting guy, I loved it. I thought it was such a great twist. Yeah, I can see why people didn't, but for me it didn't affect my enjoyment of the movie negatively. It made me love it even more. Iron Man 3 did a very interesting thing with Tony Stark. It took what happened at the end of the Avengers, where he almost died, and used that for the third film. It had him very much broken. He was scarred by the things that he'd been through, and it only added more layers to Tony that made him just fascinating to watch. That is to see him come to grips, come to terms with what he'd been through. Yeah, I loved it. And they even had a kid actor in this who didn't piss me off, which is great. I mean, saying that, kid actors have got a lot better over the years, but yeah, I was worried when there was going to be a high focus on this child in this one, because I thought he could be very annoying, but no, it wasn't the case, and his interactions with Tony were so much fun to see. Effects-wise, I thought it was brilliant. Tony Stark's home being destroyed is one of my favourite sequences in the entire MCU so far. And the ultimate villain, Guy Pearce's character, I thought was incredibly menacing, and his plan made sense. I mean, taking it down to its core, he was just somebody who was pissed at Tony from years ago and is out for a bit of revenge. Like, it's not that deep, but he seemed like a character who was willing to do anything to get what he wanted. This film also made the character of Pepper Potts a lot more interesting than she had been before. It used her in a really good way, and it had her have a hero moment of her own at the end then, rather than just being the damsel in distress. I appreciate that. I love Iron Man 3 a lot. And yeah, I'm putting it at this point in my top 10. I don't care. Number 6, Captain America Civil War. Between these films now, in the upper 5 or 6, there's not a huge amount in them. It was just which ones I remember enjoying the most. Captain America Civil War is a great film. It's the first time we've seen so many of these heroes on the screen together at one time, and it's a stunning experience. At its core, the story is about the separation of Tony Stark and Steve Rogers. It's about how the Avengers become fractured, how they start this civil war between themselves. And it's not, and I appreciate this, it's not done in an overblown way. It's an entirely personal story. It's personal to Captain America, to Steve Rogers, and it's personal to Tony Stark. Like, you understand, at least I do, both of these points, both of where they're coming from, and it makes it incredibly complex. And a lot of time is given to allow this story to breathe. It's not rushed. It's not brushed aside in favour of some giant action sequence, although there is an incredible one. Everything's allowed to just naturally occur. I mean, take the end. There's a great fight scene at the end, but it's not all spectacle. It's not a giant, overblown action sequence at all. It's a personal fight between 3 characters, and coming down to between 2 characters, between these 2 people that we followed since the start of this MCU journey, and just watching them collide. Like, that's the film's climax, as what it should be. There is, of course, an incredible action sequence in this, and it's everything that happens at the airport. I think I've watched that scene in particular, that whole sequence, about 8 times now, and it never gets boring, it never gets old. There's so many new things to see each time, and almost every character is used perfectly. Civil War also gives us Peter Parker for the first time. More on him in just a moment. And it's admirable that you get new characters coming in. You're using all of these old characters that you've seen for such a long time, and it doesn't feel messy. And that's an accomplishment. It doesn't feel messy in the slightest. It feels like a wonderfully crafted film. The only reason it's not higher is just on an enjoyment level, there just happens to be a few films that I enjoyed more. But yeah, this is a very, very good MCU film. Number 5, Spider-Man Homecoming. Spider-Man Homecoming shouldn't have worked. This is the third iteration of Peter Parker we've had on the screen in 15 years. Tobey Maguire was great. I enjoyed Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, even if the films themselves weren't that great. So a lot of pressure was on Tom Holland, and there was also that worrying thing of, would people care? Would people be that interested in yet another Spider-Man? Yes, they were. Spider-Man Homecoming was a breath of fresh air. Like, it was such a great film, much better than I expected it to be. And let's start with something that I often criticise the MCU for, and that's its villain. Michael Keaton's character here is fully believable. He's one of the best villains that these films have had. It makes sense why he's pissed at people like Tony Stark. Like, it completely makes sense. And I could see how he ended up on the path that he did, and how he made the choices that he made, and how he became this person. That's, for me, a villain should be that. A villain should have that about them where you can identify with them. Yeah, Michael Keaton nailed this. But being a Spider-Man movie, Tom Holland needed to nail it as well, and 1000% did he. Like, this is my favourite version of Peter Parker now. He just seems to be having such fun in the role, and the film feels fun as a result of it. I mean, yeah, the script is brilliant as well, but Holland really needed to step up. He really needed to have that boyish wonder of somebody who's got these incredible powers and just keeps wanting to use them. And he does. For me, the best thing that Spider-Man Homecoming did was something it didn't do, which was the origin story. I was so worried that we get another rehash of... I can't see Uncle Ben die again. Like, it's becoming a bit traumatic just watching this guy die over and over again, but it skips all that. It doesn't go back to before his appearance in Civil War. It takes place afterwards. It brings in Tony Stark. It builds the larger MCU world around Spider-Man. And it's just the perfect way to have handled this. The supporting cast are great here as well, like all of them. And Peter Parker's friend is so funny. Aunt May continues to show that she's just a great version of this character. We're used to her being this old lady, and that's not what we get in this one. But yeah, it still works. I still feel that there's a closeness between her and Peter Parker. Yeah, Spider-Man Homecoming was more than I ever thought it would be, and I absolutely loved it. I cannot wait for the sequel, and I cannot wait to see Peter Parker again in Infinity War. Number 4, Black Panther. Now, admittedly, I've only watched this once. It comes out on Blu-ray here. It comes out in June, so I'll be watching it again then. But I was so relieved with Black Panther. Because the previous year's films, with the triple whammy of Guardians 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, and Thor Ragnarok, it was a much lighter MCU. It was much more reliant on comedy and just a general breeziness about them. There wasn't too much in the way of serious drama. Black Panther came along and very much was drama. Yeah, it had funny moments, and it had quite a few of them, but it had the balance right. It still felt like a very serious film. It still felt like I was watching genuine people, like I was getting invested in a dramatic story in a way that those other films hadn't quite managed to do. And again, much like with Spider-Man Homecoming, the villain here is... Michael B. Jordan is fantastic. I mean, he always is. Like, he was even managed to be good in Fantastic Four, and that film was awful, but he was great in it. He has stepped up here to become... I don't know between him or Michael Keaton's villain which one I prefer, but Michael B. Jordan's really giving him a run for his money there. It says a lot that the final fight, which is basically two versions of this one character both wearing these suits, which normally I hate, normally I find just a really lazy way of having a final fight, but I was so invested in the story, I was so invested in the characters by the time this happened that I didn't care. I loved that final fight. I love this film. Another sign of how good a film is the characters and how much I love them. T'Challa is brilliant. I loved him in Civil War. I love him again in this. But he's not my favourite character in this at all. Danai Gurira's Okoye, I think that's how you say her name, I hope it is. She's my second favourite. Like, she's just so kick-ass in this film. It's so much fun to just watch this woman be able to handle herself and be able to take charge. And yeah, I loved her. She's used everything that I think she's learnt from Michonne and carried it over into the MCU. And now I think she's too good for The Walking Dead now. Like, I can't wait to see other films that Danai Gurira does, because she amazed me in this. Letitia Wright as Shuri, though, T'Challa's sister. my favourite character in the MCU. When everything else was all serious, when all the other characters were not necessarily wallowing, but when they were really deep in their problems, Shuri was just a breath of fresh air. She was so light, she was so breezy, she was so much fun to watch that I was captivated by her whenever she appeared on the screen, every single time. Most characters in this made an impression on me. Everett Ross, again, Martin Freeman's character, he didn't do a great deal for me in Civil War. It was nice to see him, but he was able to do something different and to give a different side to the character in this one. I loved watching him. Andy Serkis was fantastic in it. Forrest Whitaker can never put a foot wrong. He's played the same character quite a lot now, but he's very good at what he does. I loved him in this. And the world building of Wakanda, I want to go visit that place. Like, more than any other film, this Black Panther set the stage. It set where this was. It set where this world was. And it did it perfectly. I didn't feel like I was watching a film. I felt like I was really seeing a place called Wakanda. It wasn't all perfect. There was 2 love stories in this that did nothing for me. One involving T'Challa. Like, I didn't feel a connection between him and Nakia. There's also Denai Guerrero's character as well is also in a relationship with another character, but that, I don't know, that was odd. Like, it didn't feel like it had come from anywhere. I didn't feel invested in that relationship, and it came back into play a little bit at the end, but it was almost ignored for most of the film, and it just felt a bit strange. So yeah, Black Panther's not perfect, but I absolutely loved it. Almost every second of it. I cannot wait for Black Panther 2. Number 3, Guardians of the Galaxy. To get a big flaw out of the way, the villain's terrible. Like, not a great villain, but this is one of the rare films that I'm kind of alright with it. Guardians had a big job to do. It was taking the MCU in an entirely new direction. It was going off into space. It had a talking tree and a raccoon, for Christ's sake. Like, this was definitely a break from the norm. And it had a lot of characters to introduce in the process. It was much more important to give us the characters of Peter Quill, to give us Gamora, Drax, Rocket, Groot. Like, we needed to establish who these people were, and we needed to fall in love with these characters. So I can see why the character of Ronan was a little bit of a hatchet job villain. It doesn't detract from how much I love this film, though. I just ear-to-ear smile throughout this. It felt so fresh. It felt like something I hadn't seen before. Also, it was hysterical. Like, even the trailers didn't do justice to how much fun this was. Drax, for example. I wasn't sure what to really think of Drax when I saw the promotional material for this one. Ended up loving him. Out of the first 2 Guardians, Drax is still my favourite. The action scenes were incredible. Like, this film looked gorgeous. And it sounded amazing. The smartest thing, I think, that was done by James Gunn here was to have a real emphasis on the music. It gave this a very, very different feel, I think, than all the other films did. And also, by having it set out in space and by having it be something that's sci-fi, not everybody loves sci-fi, to have the music be such an integral part of it gave people something to latch onto, I feel. But yeah, this is perfectly cast, it's perfectly paced, it's perfectly written, almost. Love Guardians of the Galaxy. Very happy to have it in my top 3. Number 2, and if you'd be keeping track, you'd be able to figure out what number 1 is. Number 2 is The Avengers. And I'm calling it The Avengers. I'm not calling it Avengers Assemble. That was its name over here. Stupid name. I never really got why. Apparently they did that because there was a TV show in the 70s called The Avengers and people might get them confused. Thanks. Got real faith in us. The Avengers was the culmination of the entire first phase of the MCU. It was the film that brought together Iron Man, Hulk, Captain America and Thor, along with Black Widow and Hawkeye, to fight against Loki. And it was a breathtakingly good film. This made me feel like I was a child again. Watching these characters come together for the first time was with a script written by Joss Whedon, who I think did a fantastic job writing and directing this. It blew me away. I talk a lot about the MCU having a villain problem. It didn't with the Avengers. It gave us Loki, who had stepped up to be full-fledged villain. A villain so powerful that it took a group to take him down, while keeping him a character that I could relate to, that I could understand what he was doing. And it's also a testament to how good this film is that it has a lot of faceless villains in its final act. Like the team are fighting against just this group of aliens who have no real personality about them. They're just fodder for violence. But yet it still feels epic. It still feels like I'm watching a fantastic fight. And I've seen this film so many times now and it never gets old. I never get bored of it. I think it was important to get somebody like Joss Whedon in to write this because he's very good at writing ensemble pieces. He's good at taking time, taking moments out to allow these people to interact and to get to know each other and to argue and to quabble and to quip against each other. He's so good at doing that, and he uses it to great effect in the Avengers. The instant banter between Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, the fact that they like each other but they also don't, like they're forced to work together and they know they're not exactly the type of people they choose to hang out with. Like, I get that from them. I get that from the way that it's written and the way that it's performed. This is a film with too many memorable moments that I can't pick a favourite. There's from Coulson getting stabbed to Hulk punching Thor to the way that Loki's finally taken down. There's just so many great moments throughout this. It's endlessly rewatchable. It also managed to up the stakes without things feeling overblown. That final battle that goes on for quite a while, it doesn't feel like it's repeating itself. It feels fresh every single second because there's so many different things thrown in. And man, I love this film. I love it so much. Which means that number 1 is Captain America: Winter Soldier. I had really enjoyed the MCU up to this point. I loved Avengers. I liked the other films. Iron Man 2, not so much, but yeah, there was something about each of them that I did enjoy. Winter Soldier was the first time that I really took notice of the MCU. This was the first time that it felt like something more than a superhero movie. This was a political espionage thriller, while still retaining the superhero qualities about it. It combined these two genres absolutely perfectly. The first Avenger is nowhere near my favourite of the MCU films. It's, as you've seen, very low on my list. I didn't go into Winter Soldier expecting all that much. I wasn't overly excited about another film focusing on Captain America. And yet the Russo brothers seem to understand how to make Captain America work best, which is to take him out of his comfort zone and to put him with other people. Falcon is a brilliant addition to this one. Black Widow comes into her own more than any other film that she's been in so far in Winter Soldier. The dynamic between Natasha Romanoff and Steve Rogers is so good. Like, the two of them have such great chemistry together. Like, the scenes between them are electric. The mystery of the Winter Soldier wasn't so much of a mystery. I think most people called who that was before it was revealed that it was Bucky. But it doesn't detract from how it's played out. This movie allows itself to breathe. It allows situations to develop. It doesn't try and rush into the next big action sequence, although there are some incredible ones in this. It really lets the story lead the characters, which is exactly how it should be. And then there's the small matter of Hydra. This, I think, still, this film more than any other completely changed the MCU. It had a knock-on effect down to the TV shows. I mean, if it wasn't for Captain America: Winter Soldier, we may not have Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. being good. It held off becoming a great show because it had to wait for this movie to come out. So I'm forever indebted to Winter Soldier for making Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. the brilliant show that it went on to become. This was a film about just taking the foundations of what had been built so far and just tearing them out. The Avengers had been built by S.H.I.E.L.D. S.H.I.E.L.D. got them all together, and by the end of this one, S.H.I.E.L.D's no more. Like, S.H.I.E.L.D. has completely folded. I think I've seen Winter Soldier at least a dozen times. It's one of those films where if I can't think of anything else to watch, I immediately go to it. It was proof that superhero films needn't just be superhero films. They can be so much more. And future MCU films went ahead and proved that too. So yeah, my number 1 spot, Captain America: Winter Soldier. I really hope it gets beaten by Infinity War. It's held on to that number 1 spot for a long time. So that's my ranking of the MCU. Anything you agree with, anything you disagree with, and tell me your rankings. Like, list them in the comments. I'd love to know what other people, the order that other people will put them in. And I just love talking MCU. So yeah, let's talk about it. Let's discuss where I place these. Thank you very much for watching. You can follow me on Twitter at JoePJulians. There's more videos on the channel that you're welcome to have a look through if you wish. If you enjoyed this video, hit like, it would help me out. Hit subscribe as well because it makes me feel good. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.